The courthouse in Cedar Falls was unusually quiet for a Tuesday morning. The sun streamed through the tall windows, casting sharp golden rectangles across the polished wooden floor. A thin layer of dust floated in the shafts of light, disturbed only by the occasional shuffle of papers or the clicking of polished shoes. The room smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant, a combination that always made Judge Keller's stomach twist with anticipation. Today was not a normal day in this courthouse. Today, 7-year-old Lily Hart would enter a courtroom filled with tension, fear, and lives teetering on the edge of disaster. Lily clutched her rabbit tightly, its worn ears drooping and one button eye missing. The small stuffed animal had been with her through more than any child should endure. Her fingers dug into the fabric, knuckles whitening, as she followed her mother through the heavy double doors. The room seemed impossibly large to her tiny frame, the benches rising like bleachers around a stadium of grown-ups. She stopped at the edge of the polished floor, feeling every stare prick her skin like needles. People were whispering in low tones, eyes darting between her and the man seated at the defendant's table. Her father, Richard Hart, looked nothing like the frightened child she had been forced to grow up around. Tall, broad-shouldered, with an expression that always seemed calm yet dangerous, he lounged in his chair like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. His eyes, cold and calculating, followed Lily's every move. To everyone else he appeared composed, just another man awaiting judgment. But Lily knew. She had learned to read the subtleties, the small twitch of his jaw, the way his hand hovered near the edge of the table. She had learned to understand danger without a single word being spoken. Her mother, Julia, walked beside her, lips pressed tight, hands trembling under the weight of invisible chains. She tried to project calm for Lily, but inside she felt panic twisting her chest. Years of fear and manipulation had led them here, to this courtroom, where the law would decide whether Richard Hart would face consequences for the years of control, threats, and cruelty that had haunted their lives. Julia's eyes flicked to the defense attorney, a woman in her mid-40s, perfectly coiffed, whose expression was unreadable. She had come prepared to defend, to argue, to cast doubt on Lily's voice before it could even reach the judge. Judge Raymond Keller, seasoned and meticulous, sat at the bench, fingers steepled, gaze steady. He had seen countless family cases, but something about today felt different. He noticed the slight stiffness in Lily's walk, the careful way she balanced her rabbit against her chest, almost as if it were a shield. She moved with a precision that spoke of survival instincts honed far beyond her years. The judge had seen nervous children before, shaking, stammering, afraid of the formalities. Lily, however, seemed to carry an unspoken code, a small, almost imperceptible signal she gave when she felt eyes on her or danger near. As she climbed onto the witness stand, she glanced at the courtroom with wide, cautious eyes. Her gaze met her father's for a brief moment. His expression didn't change, but his entire demeanor shifted imperceptibly. Lily knew he had noticed her. She exhaled slowly, calming herself, and raised 2 fingers subtly, a movement so slight most people would miss it, but Judge Keller's trained eyes caught it immediately. It was almost imperceptible. One finger tapped lightly on the stuffed rabbit, then the other. The judge's chest tightened. That gesture wasn't ordinary. That gesture spoke. The bailiff stepped forward and whispered instructions to Lily. Her small voice barely rose above a whisper as she replied, "Yes, sir," nodding just slightly. Her mother sat nearby, hands clasped so tightly her nails dug crescents into her palms. The prosecutor approached, a kind but firm woman named Dana Brooks, known for her ability to coax the truth from even the most frightened witnesses. She crouched slightly to Lily's level, smiling gently. "Hi, Lily," she said softly. "I'm going to ask you a few questions. It's okay to tell the truth, okay?" Lily nodded, the rabbit pressed tightly to her cheek. She didn't speak, but instead her small hand shifted once again, tapping twice lightly on her wrist, the sequence precise. Judge Keller's eyes widened imperceptibly. He had seen this before, not often, but enough to recognize the pattern. These were signals taught to children in crisis situations, a silent language reserved for moments when speaking aloud could put them in danger. The sequence Lily made meant something serious, urgent, and possibly life-threatening. Across the room, Richard Hart's posture stiffened. His eyes narrowed slightly and he leaned forward, lips moving silently as if issuing a warning or a threat. The defense attorney glanced at him but quickly looked back at Lily, assuming she was just a nervous child. No one else seemed to notice the tiny, silent communication taking place, but Judge Keller did, and something inside him stirred, an instinct, a pulse of caution. He slammed his gavel lightly, a signal for silence that immediately hushed the courtroom. Everyone froze, sensing something unusual. Julia's breath hitched and she instinctively reached for Lily, but the bailiff gently held her back, whispering, "She's safe, don't interfere." Lily pressed the rabbit to her chest, trembling, but she raised her eyes to meet the judge's. Her gaze was steady, filled with unspoken warning. It was a look that said, "I need help, and I trust you to understand." The courtroom seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with tension. Even the light from the tall windows seemed to pause, caught in the moment between innocence and danger. Judge Keller leaned forward slightly, scanning the room. The prosecutor, unaware of the silent exchange, prepared to begin the official questioning. But the judge held up his hand, signaling a pause. Something about Lily's gestures had set off alarms in his mind. He had been trained to recognize danger hidden in plain sight, and this child was speaking in a language only the careful could interpret. Her fingers tapped once again, softly, almost timidly, but the meaning was clear to him. She was scared. Very scared, and she had a reason to be. Richard Hart shifted in his chair, a subtle, almost invisible motion, the slightest twitch of his hand as if testing boundaries. Judge Keller's eyes narrowed. He could feel the weight of the room's anticipation pressing down, the hush of a dozen pairs of eyes waiting for something to happen. Lily, sensing the tension, hugged her rabbit closer, her small body rigid with fear and determination. She was a child, yes, but she carried the knowledge of danger too heavy for her years. The judge exhaled slowly, steadying his heartbeat. He had to make a decision fast. The next move, the next question, could determine the safety of everyone in that room, particularly the little girl before him. He leaned down slightly, voice calm but firm. "Miss Hart," he said, "I want you to know that you are safe here. If you need to tell me something, it's okay to do it in your way." At that moment, Lily's fingers rose again, tapping on her rabbit with quiet precision. Judge Keller's stomach turned over. He recognized the pattern immediately, the silent call for help embedded in gestures only a trained eye could catch. The room, oblivious to the subtle signals, seemed to pulse with ordinary courtroom tension. But in Judge Keller's mind, the world had narrowed to the small figure on the witness stand, her trembling hands, and the silent language she used to cry for help. And then, without warning, the judge realized the gravity of what Lily was communicating. His gavel hovered above the desk, fingers stiff. He had seen cases like this before, children with coded gestures revealing dangers adults couldn't see, but never this direct, never this immediate. His pulse quickened. He glanced at the defendant, whose posture betrayed nothing to the untrained eye, but everything to the judge. The tension coiled, and Judge Keller's decision was made before any words were spoken. He had to act, and he had to act now. The courtroom seemed unaware, the murmurs of spectators barely audible, but Judge Keller felt the hair on the back of his neck rise. He slammed his gavel firmly, standing abruptly. The echo of the strike rang through the room. Gasps filled the benches. All eyes turned to him, and the little girl on the witness stand, fingers still pressing against her rabbit, looked up briefly, almost imperceptibly, as if confirming that he had noticed her silent plea. The judge's eyes locked on the defendant. There was no doubt in his mind. Something dangerous was happening, something hidden behind the polite veneer of the courtroom. And in that split second he knew, whatever came next, whatever threat Lily faced, it was closer than anyone could imagine. The room held its collective breath, the sunlight glinting sharply off polished surfaces. Lily's fingers moved again, small taps against the rabbit, precise, deliberate. And in that quiet signal, Judge Keller saw the first thread of the story that would unfold. A story of fear, courage, and a child whose silence might just save lives. The judge's heart raced. He knew the next seconds could change everything, and he was ready to act. The courtroom seemed to breathe in unison, as if the walls themselves had sensed the danger. Judge Keller's eyes, sharp and alert, followed every twitch of Lily's small fingers. Her 2 quick taps on the rabbit had not been random. He was certain of that. Years of experience had taught him that children rarely communicated so deliberately without purpose. And the sequence she had just completed was a pattern he recognized from a child safety seminar he had attended months ago. A silent code for imminent danger. The defendant, Richard Hart, leaned back in his chair, a faint smirk playing on his lips as if he thought the little girl's gesture was meaningless. He tapped his fingers on the table, slow and deliberate, eyes flicking to the bailiff stationed around the room. But the judge had noticed a subtle tension in his posture, the way his shoulders stiffened, the slight twitch in his jaw. Even someone who appeared composed could betray a flicker of intention, and Keller was trained to see it. This man was hiding something. Across the courtroom, spectators whispered among themselves, oblivious to the silent drama unfolding before them. Julia Hart, Lily's mother, gripped her purse so tightly her knuckles were pale. She tried to project calm for Lily's sake, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her fear. The mother's gaze shifted between her daughter and the defendant, catching the smallest movements, the slightest expressions. Julia knew danger when she saw it, even if the rest of the room didn't. She had lived it for years. The prosecutor, Dana Brooks, approached the stand again, her expression carefully neutral. "Lily," she said softly, crouching to the child's level, "can you tell us what happened that day?" Her voice was gentle, coaxing, meant to ease the tension. Lily didn't respond with words. Instead, she shifted slightly, pressing her thumb against the palm of her hand, a new signal. Judge Keller's stomach tightened. He had seen this gesture before. In crisis training, it indicated immediate concern for someone's safety nearby. The judge leaned forward, his voice calm but commanding. "Miss Hart," he said, "I want you to know this is a safe place. If you feel like you can show me what you need to without speaking." Lily's eyes met his, wide and trembling, yet filled with determination. She raised her rabbit slightly, tapping once on its ear, then twice on her wrist, repeating the sequence. Judge Keller's pulse quickened. The coded gestures were clear. She was trying to tell him something her voice could not. The defendant's eyes flicked to his daughter, narrowing just slightly. He whispered something under his breath, and Lily's fingers shook ever so slightly in response. The subtle interaction was enough to alert Keller further. She was not only scared, but she was being controlled through intimidation even now, in full view of the courtroom. The judge's mind raced. He could not wait for verbal testimony. Every second counted. Julia's eyes welled with tears. She leaned toward the bailiff, whispering, "Something's wrong, he's controlling her." But before she could elaborate, the judge's gavel slammed down again. The sharp sound silenced the murmurs instantly. "Everyone remain seated," Keller commanded, his voice carrying an edge that left no room for argument. "No one moves until I say so." Officers stiffened, glancing at each other as they assessed the situation. Lily's father shifted in his chair, attempting to mask his agitation with a calm exterior. But Judge Keller saw the tension in his knuckles, the tightening of his jaw, the brief flinch when Lily tapped her wrist again. The pattern was deliberate, insistent. She was trying to communicate fear, danger, and, most importantly, that she believed the threat was immediate. Keller's heart thumped in his chest. He had to act carefully. Any rash move could provoke the defendant, but any delay could put Lily in real harm. The courtroom's attention swung back and forth. Dana Brooks, unaware of the silent signals, prepared to question Lily further. She took a gentle breath and asked, "Can you tell us where you were that day?" Lily didn't answer. She pressed her thumb to her palm, her small fingers curling around her rabbit, eyes wide with caution. Judge Keller's stomach sank. This wasn't typical fear or nervousness. This was a child trying to communicate something vital without words. Keller caught a glimpse of the defense attorney, a composed woman who seemed to think Lily's silence was simply stubbornness. "Your Honor," she began, "it seems the child is unwilling or unable to respond. Perhaps she is too young." The judge cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Sit down," he said, voice low but commanding. His eyes remained locked on Lily. "I have observed her gestures. I understand them. She is signaling danger." The words hung in the air, invisible yet heavy. The courtroom's hum of whispers began to rise, curiosity and concern mixing with confusion. People leaned forward, sensing something extraordinary was unfolding, though none could yet grasp the magnitude. Officers stationed near the defendant shifted slightly, just enough to be ready for action if necessary. Judge Keller rose slightly from the bench, his body language calm but alert. His mind raced, tracing every possible scenario. Lily's small, trembling signals were precise. She wasn't merely scared of being on the stand. She was signaling fear of an immediate threat, one she could not speak aloud for fear of retaliation. The judge had seen cases like this before in training, but never so direct, never so immediate. The defendant's lips moved again, almost imperceptibly. He whispered under his breath, and Lily's fingers reacted with a subtle but deliberate tap on her rabbit. The judge leaned forward. That reaction confirmed his suspicion. Richard Hart was issuing a silent threat, and Lily was responding, following a coded system designed to alert a trusted adult. The courtroom's atmosphere thickened, tension pulsing through every corner. The spectators were unaware of the silent drama, but Judge Keller felt the weight of it fully. He exhaled slowly, steadying himself. He had to keep the situation calm while protecting Lily. He gestured subtly to the bailiffs, signaling them to be ready without alarming the room. "Miss Hart," he said gently, "you can continue in whatever way you feel safe. We are here to listen and you are protected." Lily's gaze met his again, and she lifted her rabbit, tapping once on its ear, then twice on her wrist. The message was clear. Danger was present, and it was close. Julia's hands trembled visibly now. She leaned toward the judge slightly, whispering, "He's always been like this, controlling, threatening. She's signaling that it's happening now." Keller nodded subtly, understanding the urgency without giving away the situation to the rest of the courtroom. The prosecutor, still unaware, was preparing to continue questioning, and the defense attorney's expression remained composed, smug even, unaware that her client had just been unmasked by a child's silent courage. Judge Keller's eyes flicked to Richard Hart. Every subtle twitch, every tightened muscle, every fleeting glance betrayed more than any words could. The defendant thought he was in control, but he had not accounted for Lily's courage, her knowledge of the coded signals, and the judge's ability to recognize them. Keller's pulse quickened. Every instinct screamed that this was no ordinary case. This was a situation where action had to be immediate yet precise to prevent disaster. The courtroom hung on the edge of a precipice. Every adult was unaware, yet every movement, every subtle signal, was a communication between the child and the judge. Lily's fingers moved once more, almost timidly, yet with the unmistakable intent of someone delivering a message too important to be spoken aloud. Judge Keller's face drained of color. He realized the gravity of the situation. Lily was not simply scared. She was communicating a threat that, if ignored, could have immediate and devastating consequences. The judge slammed his gavel sharply, the echo bouncing off the courtroom walls. Everyone jumped. All eyes turned to him. He rose fully to his feet, voice commanding yet measured. "Everyone remain seated," he said, the authority in his tone brooking no argument. "We will proceed with caution. No one moves until I instruct otherwise." The spectators murmured in confusion, the tension so palpable that it was almost physical. Lily pressed her rabbit to her chest, fingers shaking slightly, yet her gaze remained steady. She had done her part, communicated the danger. Now it was the judge's turn to act. Judge Keller's mind raced, considering every possible scenario, every move Richard Hart might make. The child's silent signals had opened a window into a hidden threat that the rest of the courtroom had no awareness of. He had to respond carefully, decisively, and with precision. And in that moment, as sunlight streamed through the tall windows and dust motes danced in the golden light, Judge Keller realized the full weight of the day ahead. The courtroom was no longer just a room of legal proceedings. It was a stage for courage, deception, and survival. And the smallest person in the room, the child with the rabbit clutched to her chest, was holding the key to everyone's safety. The judge exhaled, eyes fixed on Lily, fingers tight around the gavel. He knew the next move could change everything. And as the room held its collective breath, Lily's fingers moved once more, tapping deliberately. This time the message was unmistakable. Danger was close, very close, and Judge Keller, standing poised to act, felt the first real surge of fear in his long career. Courtroom waited unaware, as a quiet child communicated a threat louder than any words, and the judge knew the next seconds would define all their lives. The courtroom seemed to contract around Lily, shrinking until she felt the walls pressing in with the weight of unseen eyes. Every pair of adult eyes darted toward her, some curious, some expectant, yet none noticed the silent code she was desperately sending. Judge Keller, however, had leaned forward, elbows resting on the bench, eyes sharp as a hawk. He knew that little taps on her wrist and rabbit were not random. This was a child conveying a warning, each movement precise, deliberate, filled with meaning that only a trained adult could interpret. Julia Hart, sitting nearby, instinctively reached for Lily's hand. Her trembling fingers brushed against the child, but the bailiff's gentle grip on her arm stopped her. "Stay back, ma'am," the officer whispered. "She's safe. We'll protect her." Julia exhaled sharply, eyes fixed on her daughter. She could feel the fear emanating from Lily as if it were a living thing, coiling around her chest, squeezing. She had lived through Richard Hart's temper for years, and she knew instinctively when danger was immediate. Judge Keller's pulse raced as he pieced together the silent sequence Lily was communicating. 2 taps on the rabbit, a double tap on her wrist, followed by a thumb pressed into her palm. In training, this meant extreme danger. It was a cry for help. And it wasn't hypothetical. The threat was present, nearby, immediate. The judge's eyes darted to Richard Hart. He appeared calm, almost casual, but every muscle in his body betrayed tension. There was a reason Lily wasn't speaking. The judge had to act with surgical precision. Dana Brooks, the prosecutor, leaned closer, trying again. "Lily, can you tell us what he did?" she asked softly, her voice coaxing but unthreatening. Lily's small head shook. Her fingers moved, quick, subtle taps that only the judge fully understood. Each motion was a word in a silent language, conveying fear, warning, and the knowledge that saying the truth aloud could provoke immediate danger. Judge Keller felt a shiver crawl down his spine. He had seen children in crisis, but never one so composed under such direct threat. The defendant's eyes narrowed imperceptibly. He whispered something just under his breath, the sound too low for anyone to hear. But Lily's fingers reacted immediately, tapping in a precise pattern. Judge Keller recognized the response. She was acknowledging a threat that was current, not past. He leaned slightly to the bailiff, signaling discreetly to maintain close watch on the defendant. The tension in the room was a living thing, thick and palpable, pressing on every witness, spectator, and officer alike. Julia's breath hitched, panic threatening to overtake her. "She's telling the truth," she whispered, voice trembling. "He's threatening her right now." The judge nodded subtly, keeping his gaze fixed on Lily. He understood the stakes. If he misjudged the signals, the results could be catastrophic. Every second mattered. Every movement could escalate the situation or protect the child. The courtroom's quiet hum of murmurs became a background to the silent emergency unfolding before him. The defense attorney, sensing her client's agitation, leaned forward. "Your Honor," she said, voice polite but firm, "it's clear the child is unwilling to speak. Perhaps she's too young to comprehend." Judge Keller slammed his gavel sharply, the echo bouncing off the walls, silencing the courtroom immediately. "Sit down," he commanded, voice firm. His eyes never left Lily. "I have observed her gestures. I understand what she is communicating. There is a threat. This courtroom will proceed with caution." The murmurs intensified, confusion rippling through spectators and attorneys alike. Few realized a child's silent code had just unmasked a threat invisible to most eyes. Lily's fingers moved again, this time slower, more deliberate. 1 tap on her rabbit, 2 on her wrist, then a subtle press of her thumb against her palm. The judge's heart thudded. This wasn't fear of speaking in public. This was a precise, calculated alert. Danger wasn't just possible, it was immediate. He had trained for moments like this, but this was real. Right here. Right now. Richard Hart leaned back, an almost imperceptible smirk crossing his face. He thought he had control. He believed the child would be too terrified to act or signal, but he had underestimated her, and he had underestimated Judge Keller. The child was not only aware of the danger, she was prepared to communicate it silently, and the judge recognized it. Keller's eyes darted to the bailiffs. They stiffened in response, readying themselves, hands hovering near their holsters, silent signals of readiness passing between them. Dana Brooks, still unaware of the silent emergency, continued gently, "Lily, where were you when this happened?" Lily did not answer. Her head bowed slightly, eyes fixed on the worn rabbit pressed against her chest. Her fingers moved again, this time in a pattern longer, more complex, spelling out fear, danger, and the presence of a concealed threat. Judge Keller exhaled sharply. He had seen this sequence once before during specialized child protection training. It was reserved for extreme situations, when speaking could provoke immediate harm, when a child's voice alone could endanger herself or others. Julia's eyes widened as she recognized the sequence herself, the memory of her own abuse flooding back. Her voice shook as she whispered, "He's doing it, he's threatening her even now." The judge gave a subtle nod, acknowledging her fear without escalating the moment. He had to maintain calm in the courtroom, keep all parties under control while acting decisively. The stakes were too high for hesitation. Richard Hart's movements became more noticeable now. A subtle lean forward, fingers flexing slightly on the table, a whisper carried just under his breath. Lily's fingers responded immediately, a flicker of movement, subtle but undeniable. Keller's stomach knotted. This wasn't hypothetical. The threat was unfolding in real time, and every gesture mattered. The courtroom was oblivious to the silent emergency, but to the judge, the child, and her mother, it was a matter of life and death. The judge's voice was calm, precise. "Miss Hart, you are safe here. You can continue to communicate however you feel most comfortable. Your safety is my priority." Lily's eyes met his, a flicker of trust crossing her small, tear-streaked face. She tapped the rabbit once, twice on the wrist, thumb pressed firmly against her palm. The judge's pulse quickened. The message was clear. Danger was imminent, present, and immediate. Julia's hands shook visibly. She wanted to reach her daughter, to pull her close and protect her, but she had to trust the judge and the bailiffs. She whispered again, "He's always been like this, controlling, manipulative. She's telling us it's happening right now." Keller's mind raced. Every instinct screamed that a decisive, immediate action was necessary, yet it had to be precise. Misstep could provoke the defendant, putting Lily in actual harm. The judge subtly signaled to the bailiffs, who adjusted their positions slightly, staying within reach of the defendant. He remained standing, eyes locked on Richard Hart. The man's calm exterior was cracking. He shifted, a slight tightening in his jaw, a narrowing of his eyes, a subtle twitch in his fingers. Keller's pulse raced. The child's silent gestures had revealed a pattern, a man who believed himself in control, and a threat that was real, immediate, and dangerous. The courtroom's attention had shifted. Spectators murmured, sensing tension, though unaware of the invisible exchange unfolding. Dana Brooks leaned closer again, gently coaxing Lily to speak. Lily remained silent, fingers moving in a slow, deliberate rhythm, tapping on her rabbit, then wrist, then pressing thumb against palm. A full, complex message of fear, threat, and warning. Keller recognized the sequence instantly. It was a child's hidden cry for help. Judge Keller exhaled, steadying himself. He knew the next few moments would determine whether the child remained safe. Richard Hart could make a sudden move at any second, and the subtle signs suggested he might. Every nerve in the judge's body was alert. The courtroom seemed frozen in a heartbeat, the sunlight sharp across polished wood, dust motes suspended in the golden light. He had to act before the silent warning became a reality. And then a realization struck him like a thunderbolt. The threat was not past, it was ongoing. The sequence Lily tapped was a direct, immediate alert. He had no time to hesitate. The courtroom might see only a frightened child refusing to speak, but he knew better. Danger was here. Danger was now. And the silent cry for help would not go unnoticed. Judge Keller slammed his gavel firmly, standing fully. "Everyone remain seated," he commanded, voice carrying authority and urgency. "No one moves until instructed." Gasps echoed across the room. Eyes widened. People shifted uneasily, unaware of the invisible threat that had just been exposed. Lily pressed her rabbit to her chest, trembling but steadfast. Her silent message had been received. The judge's heart pounded. He knew the next seconds would be decisive. The hidden cry for help had been acknowledged, and the courtroom's ordinary order was about to shatter. Danger was immediate, and every movement mattered. The courtroom air had shifted, thick with tension, though the spectators remained largely oblivious. To them, it appeared as though a small child refused to speak, while her father sat calmly, hands folded on the table. But Judge Keller saw the cracks beneath the surface, the subtle tightening of Richard Hart's jaw, the flick of a restless hand, the way his shoulders shifted like a coiled spring. Every motion spoke volumes, and every tiny gesture of Lily's fingers was a desperate signal for help. The judge's pulse thumped like a drum. He knew the next moments could define life and death. Julia Hart leaned slightly forward in her chair, gripping the edge of the bench so tightly her knuckles were white. Her gaze flicked between her daughter and Richard, instinctively measuring every micro-expression. She had lived with Richard's silent intimidation for years. A whisper here, a glance there, enough to twist a child's nerves into submission. She recognized the sequence Lily was tapping against her rabbit and wrist. It wasn't just fear, it was a message. A warning that danger wasn't abstract or past. It was present here in the courtroom. Judge Keller's eyes narrowed. He understood the stakes more clearly now than ever. The first subtle signals from Lily had alerted him. This next sequence confirmed his fears. Danger was close, and the child's code indicated a threat specifically toward her mother. The defendant's casual posture was a mask, the smirk on his face a deliberate misdirection. But Keller's experience told him the truth. Richard Hart was aware that his daughter had the power to expose him, and he would act if threatened. Dana Brooks, the prosecutor, attempted another question, her voice gentle. "Lily, can you tell us where you were on the day of the incident?" Lily's head shook slightly, her small fingers moving again, a delicate tap-tap against her rabbit, followed by a precise double tap on her wrist. Judge Keller's stomach tightened. This pattern was unmistakable. It conveyed, "I'm scared for Mom. He is threatening both of us. I cannot speak." Every motion spoke a language of fear honed through years of survival. The judge understood. He had to intervene carefully, subtly, without escalating the danger. The defendant's eyes flicked toward Lily, narrowing slightly. He whispered under his breath, almost inaudibly, a movement so small most would not notice. Lily's fingers immediately reacted, tapping in precise rhythm. Judge Keller's pulse quickened. This was a live exchange, a silent confrontation unfolding in real time. The father's control was constant, unyielding, and the child's coded response was her only defense. The courtroom remained blissfully unaware, but for the judge, the danger was starkly real. The bailiffs shifted subtly, hands hovering near the defendant, ready to act. Their eyes flicked to the judge, reading his body language, waiting for his signal. Keller's voice remained calm, measured, but beneath it surged urgency. He had to maintain the courtroom's semblance of order while taking precise action to protect the child. Any misstep could provoke Richard Hart, escalating the situation. Every second was critical. Julia whispered again, almost inaudibly, to the judge. "He's controlling her with his eyes, his movements. She's trying to tell you it's happening right now." Keller nodded subtly, acknowledging her input without alarming the courtroom. He understood. This was not ordinary courtroom fear. This was a father actively applying psychological pressure in real time, threatening both mother and child through subtle intimidation. He had to act, and he had to do it carefully. Richard Hart shifted in his seat, leaning forward slightly, his eyes darting around the room. He knew the judge was observing. He thought he had masked his intentions, but Keller saw through the facade. The subtle lean, the tightened grip on the table, the low whisper, all indicators of pressure, control, and threat. Every micro-expression was a clue, and Lily, though trembling, was sending precise signals that he recognized. Each tap on her rabbit and wrist was a coded alert. The courtroom seemed to pause in collective anticipation, though few knew why. Spectators whispered, lawyers scribbled notes, but Judge Keller's full attention was on the silent exchange. He leaned slightly closer to the bench microphone, speaking to the bailiffs quietly. "Maintain positions. No sudden movements. Observe him closely." The officers adjusted subtly, sliding slightly closer to the defendant, ready to act at the first sign of escalation. Lily's fingers moved again, deliberate and precise. One tap on the rabbit, two on the wrist, thumb pressed into the palm. The pattern was longer this time, conveying a message of urgent danger. Judge Keller's stomach tightened. The child's silent signals indicated that the threat was escalating. Her father was aware she might reveal something, and he was preparing to act. Her fear was specific, immediate, and actionable. Dana Brooks, still unaware, leaned gently toward Lily. "It's okay to tell me, Lily," she said softly. "You're safe here." Lily shook her head, fingers moving in a sequence that was impossible to ignore for the trained eye. Judge Keller's mind raced. The coded gestures indicated that speaking aloud would put her or her mother in danger. He understood the full meaning. This was a live crisis. The threat was imminent, not abstract. Richard Hart's casual demeanor hid intent, but the signals were undeniable. Julia's whisper cut through the tension. "He's watching her every movement, she can't speak." Her hands shook violently, betraying her panic. The judge's eyes flicked to her briefly, a subtle nod reassuring her. He had control, but he had to act. Any overt action could provoke the defendant, escalating the immediate danger to both mother and child. The delicate balance of intervention and patience was razor-thin. The defendant shifted again, fingers flexing on the table. His posture was slightly hunched, a predator poised. Judge Keller recognized the silent pressure he was applying, the psychological manipulation, the threat conveyed through subtle, almost invisible movements. Lily's fingers responded immediately, tapping a message that only the judge could interpret. Danger was close, present, and deliberate. The courtroom remained blissfully ignorant, but Keller could not ignore it. He exhaled slowly, steadying himself. He had to act without alarming the defendant, maintaining calm while preparing for a potential escalation. His eyes flicked briefly to the bailiffs. They understood, silent communication passing between trained adults. Every instinct screamed, act carefully but act decisively. The child's silent cry for help could not be ignored. Lily's fingers moved one final time in the sequence, small but precise. The message was unmistakable. Her father was applying immediate pressure, threatening harm if she spoke. Judge Keller's heart thudded in his chest. He had seen children in crisis, but never with such clarity, such immediacy, such danger unfolding in real time. Every muscle in his body was tense, every sense alert. The courtroom remained unaware, spectators murmuring, attorneys shuffling papers, the hum of a normal day continuing around them. But for Judge Keller, the room had become a high-stakes battlefield, where the smallest child was the messenger of imminent danger. Her silent, trembling gestures had revealed the threat her father posed, and it was escalating. Judge Keller slammed his gavel sharply, standing fully. "Everyone remain seated," he commanded, voice calm but carrying authority. The echo rippled through the courtroom. "No one moves until instructed. The witness is under my direct observation and protection." Gasps and confused murmurs swept through the spectators. Julia's hands shook, relief and fear mingling in equal measure. Lily pressed her rabbit to her chest, fingers trembling, eyes wide. Judge Keller's gaze locked on Richard Hart. The father's subtle pressure, his silent intimidation, had been revealed by a child's courageous communication. The next moves would be critical. Every second mattered. Every gesture could be the difference between safety and catastrophe. And in that tense, golden light-filled courtroom, a child's silent signals had begun to turn the tide. The courtroom had not yet realized the stakes, but Judge Keller did. Lily's coded messages were not just warnings, they were lifelines. And the moment of confrontation was approaching. The courtroom felt as though it had shifted into another dimension, one where sound and light were muted, leaving only the tension, thick and tangible, suspended in the golden sunlight streaming through the tall windows. Every spectator leaned forward slightly, sensing something extraordinary, though none could see the invisible web of danger that connected the child, the father, and the judge. Only Judge Keller understood the language unfolding before him, a silent, desperate communication that carried far more weight than words ever could. Lily's small hands trembled slightly, gripping her rabbit like a lifeline. One ear was folded back from the pressure of her fingers, but she held it close anyway, her tiny frame rigid with anxiety. Her eyes flicked to her father, Richard Hart, who sat with an unnerving calm, lips pressed together, fingers flexing rhythmically on the polished wood of the table. Every micro-movement, every twitch, carried a threat he hoped the room wouldn't detect. But Judge Keller did. And he knew he could not ignore it. Julia's breath hitched audibly. She had leaned forward, trying to interpret the signals herself, but the bailiff's gentle grip on her arm stopped her. "Stay back, ma'am," he whispered. "We'll protect her." Julia's chest heaved. Years of fear had trained her to recognize danger before it became visible. She saw the subtle intimidation, the silent menace of Richard Hart, and she knew that Lily's tiny hands were speaking truths that could save them both. The judge's pulse accelerated. He had seen children in crisis situations, but he had never encountered one so composed under such pressure. Lily's movements, one tap on the rabbit, two on the wrist, thumb pressed firmly into the palm, were precise, deliberate, and urgent. Each gesture carried a clear message. Danger was near, immediate, and directed toward her and her mother. Keller's eyes locked on the defendant, reading every slight flinch, every suppressed tremor. He was calculating, but the child's coded signals revealed more than any words could. Dana Brooks, the prosecutor, leaned forward, voice calm, coaxing. "Lily, sweetie, it's okay. Can you tell us what happened?" Lily shook her head, eyes wide with fear, and tapped her wrist once more, then twice, pressing her thumb to her palm. Judge Keller's stomach tightened. The pattern was unmistakable. Her father posed a live threat. She could not speak aloud, or the consequences would be immediate. Every second counted. The subtle communication between child and judge had transformed the ordinary courtroom into a high-stakes arena. Richard Hart's posture shifted. A slight lean forward, a tightening of the jaw, fingers drumming silently against the table, each motion radiated control and menace. He whispered under his breath, so low that only a trained observer could detect it. Lily's fingers responded instantly, a rhythm that only the judge could interpret. This was no ordinary fear. This was a calculated threat, ongoing, and the child was navigating it with incredible courage. Judge Keller exhaled slowly, suppressing the adrenaline surging through him. He had to act without provoking the defendant. Any overt action could trigger a sudden movement from Richard Hart, endangering both Lily and her mother. He glanced at the bailiffs, who subtly adjusted their positions, moving closer to the defendant while maintaining the appearance of normality. The silent coordination was meticulous. The next moments could determine the safety of everyone in the room. Lily's fingers moved again, deliberate and slow. One tap on her rabbit, two on the wrist, and a firm press of her thumb against her palm. The coded message was long, complex, and chilling. It indicated escalating danger, imminent threat, and the presence of a concealed weapon. Judge Keller's mind raced. He had trained for moments like this, but nothing could fully prepare him for the reality unfolding in front of him. A child, using silent gestures, communicating a threat that could turn deadly at any second. Julia whispered, almost in disbelief, "He's watching her. Every move, he'll act if she speaks." Her voice trembled with fear and recognition. Keller gave her a subtle nod, reassuring her silently. He understood completely. The father's psychological pressure was ongoing, and the child's courage was the only thing keeping her and her mother safe. The courtroom's oblivious hum was a sharp contrast to the high-stakes tension that hung over the judge and the child. Dana Brooks continued, unaware of the silent emergency. "Lily, we need your help. Can you tell us what happened?" Lily shook her head again, fingers moving in a long, deliberate pattern. Judge Keller's heart pounded. She was conveying the presence of immediate danger, the type of threat that required precise, calm intervention. Every movement of the defendant was now amplified in his mind. The flex of a finger, the shift of a shoulder, the narrowing of eyes. He knew this was a man ready to act on impulse if challenged. The judge's voice remained calm, authoritative. "Everyone remain seated," he said, slamming the gavel once for emphasis. The echo reverberated through the room. Gasps swept the benches as spectators turned to look at him. "No one moves until instructed. The witness is under my direct observation and protection." Julia's hands shook violently, gripping the edge of the bench, her eyes never leaving Lily. Relief and fear mixed in equal measure. Lily pressed her rabbit to her chest, trembling but determined. Her silent messages had been received. Judge Keller knew the next seconds would define the outcome. He had to act decisively, yet cautiously, to prevent the situation from spiraling into catastrophe. Richard Hart's subtle pressure intensified. He leaned forward, fingers drumming against the table in a calculated rhythm, whispering under his breath. Keller's eyes narrowed. The child's coded gestures confirmed his suspicions. The threat was imminent. She was signaling danger not as a hypothetical, but as a present, immediate reality. The courtroom spectators could not see what was happening, but the tension was almost suffocating to those who could. The bailiffs adjusted again, moving in silent anticipation. Keller's gaze was fixed on the defendant. Any sudden movement could trigger a violent reaction. Lily's fingers moved once more, slow, deliberate. The pattern spelled out fear, warning, and a plea for immediate intervention. Her courage, precise and brave, had revealed the hidden danger. The judge's mind worked rapidly, calculating the safest way to de-escalate the situation without provoking Richard Hart. Lily's rabbit shifted in her grip as she raised it slightly, tapping once on the ear, twice on the wrist, thumb pressed firmly into the palm. The message was clear, immediate danger to both her and her mother. Judge Keller's chest tightened. He knew that any misstep could provoke the defendant. He had to act strategically with precision and, above all, calm authority. The courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath. Spectators leaned forward, curious and tense, though unaware of the silent, life-threatening drama playing out in front of them. Dana Brooks leaned gently toward Lily again, still unaware of the real danger. Lily's head remained bowed, fingers moving in a precise rhythm. The judge recognized the pattern instantly. Her father's threats were ongoing, and the child was desperately communicating for help without speaking aloud. Judge Keller's mind raced. Every second counted. Every gesture was a clue. He signaled subtly to the bailiffs to maintain positions while readying for immediate action. The father's subtle intimidation tactics could escalate at any moment. He needed to maintain control of the courtroom, protect the child, and be ready for the unforeseen. And then Lily's fingers made the final movement of the sequence. A deliberate, firm tap against the rabbit, a double tap on the wrist, and a thumb pressed into the palm. The message was unmistakable. Danger was not only present but imminent. Judge Keller felt the weight of the moment press down on him. He had trained for situations like this, but nothing could compare to a child sitting quietly, communicating a threat in code that could save lives. The courtroom hung in tense silence, spectators unaware, as Lily's silent cry for help reached the judge's understanding. The next seconds would determine everything. Danger was immediate, and all eyes, though few realized it, were now on the smallest, bravest person in the room. The courtroom felt frozen in a golden, tense haze. Every whisper, every shuffle of papers, every subtle movement of the spectators was drowned out by the unspoken drama unfolding before Judge Keller. Lily's small fingers pressed against her rabbit, her movements deliberate and precise. One tap on the rabbit, two on her wrist, thumb pressed firmly into her palm. The code was clear. Danger was immediate. Her father, Richard Hart, had crossed the invisible line from intimidation to real, present threat. Keller knew that the child's silent message could not be ignored. Julia Hart's hands shook violently. Her knuckles dug into the edge of the bench as she leaned forward, eyes fixed on her daughter. She knew the signals all too well. Years of fear, control, and subtle abuse had honed her instincts. She had learned to read the unspoken language of danger, and now she saw it coming from the very man seated just a few feet away, the man she had once loved, now a predator disguised in calm composure. Judge Keller exhaled slowly, keeping his voice even as adrenaline coursed through him. "Bailiffs," he whispered sharply, "stay ready, but no sudden movements. Observe him closely." The officers adjusted positions subtly, gliding closer to the defendant without alarming the spectators. Every second mattered. The silent tension was a living entity, thick and suffocating, pulsating through the room. Even the sunlight streaming through the windows seemed sharper, highlighting the polished wooden floor and the sheen on the tables, casting long, tense shadows. Richard Hart leaned slightly forward, flexing his fingers on the table. His eyes flicked toward Lily, sharp and calculating. He whispered under his breath, a threat masked by the low murmur of the courtroom. Lily's fingers responded immediately, a subtle sequence that only the judge could interpret. This was not a child's nervous tic. This was a message. Danger was imminent, and her father was ready to act if he perceived a challenge. The judge's pulse quickened. He had to maintain control, protect the child, and act with precision. Any overt move could provoke Richard Hart, transforming the tension into violence. Keller's eyes flicked to the bailiffs, who remained poised, hands hovering near their holsters, ready for instant action. The courtroom remained unaware of the high-stakes dance unfolding under their noses. Lily's fingers moved again, slow and deliberate. One tap on the rabbit, two on the wrist, thumb pressed into her palm. The message was chillingly clear. The father's threat was escalating, and she was relying on the judge to respond. Judge Keller felt the weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders like a stone. This child had placed her trust in him, and he could not fail. Julia's voice trembled as she whispered almost inaudibly, "He's escalating, he'll act if she speaks, please do something." The judge nodded subtly, signaling to her that he understood. He had to act carefully, maintaining calm and authority while preparing for immediate intervention. Any hesitation could trigger a sudden, violent response. The defendant shifted again, a slight lean forward, jaw tightening, fingers flexing against the polished table. Keller recognized the subtle prelude to action, an almost imperceptible coiling of energy ready to snap. Lily's fingers reacted immediately, tapping in precise rhythm. The message was unambiguous. Danger was immediate, present, and escalating. The courtroom remained oblivious, but for the judge, the clock was ticking. Dana Brooks, unaware of the silent communication, leaned gently toward Lily, coaxing her to speak. "Lily, it's okay. We just need your help." Lily shook her head, her small hands moving with increasing urgency. One tap on the rabbit, two on her wrist, thumb pressed firmly. This time the rhythm was insistent, almost frantic. Judge Keller's eyes narrowed. The child's signal conveyed imminent action. Her father was no longer just a threat through psychological pressure. He was preparing to escalate physically if challenged. The judge's voice remained calm, commanding, but his mind raced. "Everyone remain seated," he said, slamming the gavel with deliberate force. The echo rippled across the room, silencing whispers and shuffles. "No one moves until I instruct otherwise. The witness is under my direct observation and protection." Gasps swept through the spectators. Julia's hands shook violently, relief and terror mingling in equal measure. Lily clutched her rabbit to her chest, trembling but resolute. Judge Keller's eyes locked on Richard Hart. Every muscle, every microexpression, every subtle twitch of his fingers betrayed tension and concealed intent. He had underestimated his daughter's courage and the judge's ability to recognize the silent signs. Keller's heartbeat quickened. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing on him. Any misstep could provoke the father and endanger both mother and child. The bailiffs adjusted positions subtly. Their eyes flicked between the defendant and the judge, silently awaiting instructions. Keller exhaled slowly. He had to act decisively, yet with precision. The child's silent, coded signals demanded immediate intervention. Richard Hart's subtle pressure and latent menace had become unmistakable, and the time to wait had passed. Lily's fingers moved once more, precise, insistent. The taps on her rabbit and wrist, combined with the firm press of her thumb, were unmistakable. The threat was present and escalating. Judge Keller's pulse raced. He had trained for crisis situations, but this was unlike any scenario he had faced. A child, using silent gestures, guiding the courtroom's most crucial decisions, navigating danger in real time. Julia's voice trembled again. "He's going to," her words caught in her throat, fear overtaking her. The judge gave a subtle nod. He had to neutralize the threat before it could escalate into something irreversible. The silent signals from Lily had been enough. It was time to act. Keller raised his voice, projecting calm authority to mask the tension. "Bailiffs, move in carefully. Maintain control, protect the witness and her mother." The officers adjusted positions, gliding toward the defendant without alarming the spectators. The courtroom remained a theater of ignorance, but the chessboard of danger had shifted. Every piece was now in place. Richard Hart leaned forward slightly, tension coiling in his muscles. His eyes flicked toward Lily, misreading the subtle signal of impending action. The judge's gaze was unwavering, locking him in place. The father's smirk faltered, replaced by a fleeting hint of uncertainty. He sensed something was happening but could not see the silent coordination between child, judge, and bailiffs. Lily's hands trembled as she tapped the final sequence. One tap on the rabbit, two on the wrist, thumb pressed firmly into her palm. Judge Keller's chest tightened. She had communicated everything she could without speaking. Danger was immediate. The threat had escalated to the point where intervention was no longer optional. It was necessary. The judge exhaled sharply, and with deliberate precision he raised his gavel. "Bailiffs," he commanded, voice steady but urgent, "now, protect the child and her mother. Detain the defendant if necessary." The officers moved instantly, controlled and deliberate. Richard Hart's eyes widened, realizing too late that the courtroom's hidden tension had erupted into coordinated action. Julia gasped, relief and terror mingling as the bailiffs closed in on Richard Hart. Lily clutched her rabbit to her chest, trembling, eyes wide, as the courtroom erupted into shocked murmurs. Spectators turned, gasping, some standing, some frozen in disbelief. The father's smirk had vanished, replaced by confusion and anger as officers guided him to his feet with firm, precise control. Judge Keller's gaze remained on Lily, calm and reassuring. The child's silent courage had guided the courtroom through peril. The threat had been neutralized before anyone else realized the danger that had lurked beneath the surface. Every silent gesture, every tiny tap had been heard, understood, and acted upon. And in that suspended moment, the courtroom seemed to exhale collectively. The invisible danger had passed, but the echoes of tension and courage lingered. Lily's small hands clutched the rabbit to her chest, trembling but safe. Judge Keller nodded subtly, acknowledging her bravery. She had communicated with the strength and clarity of someone far beyond her years. The courtroom had witnessed a drama they could not fully understand. A quiet signal from a 7-year-old had saved lives, exposed a threat, and transformed the ordinary proceedings into a high-stakes ordeal of courage and silent communication. And the judge knew the story was far from over. The courtroom was a sea of murmurs, whispers, and shocked glances. Spectators turned in disbelief, some standing, some frozen mid-breath, trying to process what had just unfolded. Richard Hart, guided firmly by the bailiffs, resisted slightly at first, his smirk replaced by confusion and fear. He had underestimated the smallest, quietest person in the room, and now, in full view of the judge and every witness, his authority had been stripped away. The room had become a stage where courage had overtaken control, and everyone could feel the tension, even if they could not see its origin. Lily sat frozen on the witness stand, clutching her rabbit so tightly that its ear had bent under her fingers. Her small chest rose and fell rapidly, eyes wide as she watched the defendant being escorted out. For the first time in the day, she exhaled, a tiny sigh of relief that barely escaped her lips. Judge Keller watched her closely, his expression calm but his heart still racing. The child's silent courage had saved them all, and he had felt the weight of responsibility for every heartbeat, every tap, every subtle signal. Julia Hart's hands trembled violently. She wanted to rush to her daughter to hold her close, but the protocol of the courtroom demanded she remain seated. Tears streamed down her face, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and residual fear. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "You were so brave, Lily, so brave." Her eyes never left her daughter, watching as the child processed the whirlwind of tension, danger, and courage that had just defined their day. Judge Keller's voice cut through the murmurs, calm yet commanding. "The courtroom will now resume order. No one speaks until instructed." His eyes met Lily's, offering reassurance. The child nodded ever so slightly, a fragile smile touching her lips. She had done what no one else could, communicated danger in silence, guided the actions of those in power, and survived. Yet the intensity of what had just occurred lingered like smoke, settling heavily on everyone in the room. The spectators were finally beginning to grasp fragments of what had happened. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Did you see the little girl?" someone muttered. She saved her mother." Another shook their head, disbelief etched on their face. But even as the whispers spread, the gravity of the child's silent heroism remained largely unspoken. Few understood that a simple gesture, a tap, a press of the thumb, had directed the course of justice, prevented harm, and exposed a hidden threat. Dana Brooks approached the stand cautiously, her voice soft, reverent. "Lily, can you tell us what you just did?" Lily's eyes met hers, wide, trembling, but her voice caught in her throat. She shook her head, fingers curling around the rabbit. The prosecutor realized with a pang of awe that the child had already said everything she could without words. Her silence had spoken volumes, guiding the courtroom through a high-stakes moment that none of the adults could have navigated alone. Richard Hart's voice, muffled by the escorting bailiffs, could be heard in fragments. "This isn't over," he muttered, his words barely coherent. His composure had crumbled, replaced by confusion and fear. He had miscalculated, underestimated, and now faced consequences he had not anticipated. The room held its collective breath as officers guided him toward the exit, every step a reminder that power can be fleeting when courage stands in opposition. Judge Keller leaned slightly forward, resting his hands on the bench. His gaze swept across the room, assessing the emotional fallout. The courtroom had been transformed. Ordinary spectators had witnessed something extraordinary, though few fully grasped it. A quiet child had communicated danger, her signals interpreted by a seasoned judge who had acted with precision. The ripple of bravery, fear, and authority was palpable, leaving every adult acutely aware of the fragility of order and control. Julia finally leaned forward, cautiously reaching for Lily's hand. Their fingers intertwined, small but fierce, a silent bond of relief, love, and gratitude. Lily pressed her rabbit to her chest, trembling, but the tension had shifted from fear to fragile safety. The judge's eyes met Julia's briefly, acknowledging the depth of courage required by both mother and child. The courtroom had witnessed an extraordinary moment, a silent heroism that no words could adequately capture. Lily's fingers, still trembling slightly, tapped once more on the rabbit, twice on the wrist, thumb pressed firmly into the palm, a final, subtle signal. Judge Keller recognized it immediately, a message of lingering caution, a reminder that while immediate danger had passed, vigilance must remain. The child had guided them through peril, and now, even in the aftermath, she reminded them that courage was not only in action but in awareness. The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder. Spectators began to realize the extraordinary reality. A 7-year-old child had detected and communicated imminent danger, guiding the courtroom through a tense, potentially lethal situation. Whispered awe swept the benches. She saved her mother. "I can't believe it, just a child." Yet even as they spoke, the depth of Lily's bravery remained largely invisible. She had acted quietly, deliberately, and without expectation of recognition. Judge Keller exhaled slowly, finally allowing himself a brief moment of release. He had guided the courtroom through the unseen tension, interpreting signals invisible to most, protecting both mother and child, and ensuring that justice and safety prevailed. His gaze returned to Lily. She looked small, fragile, and exhausted, yet there was an unmistakable spark in her eyes. Courage was not absent of fear. It existed alongside it, and Lily had demonstrated it in abundance. Julia whispered softly, brushing a tear from Lily's cheek. "You were amazing, my brave girl," she said. Lily's fingers moved once more, gently tapping on the rabbit. It was a quiet gesture, almost imperceptible, but to Julia and the judge it carried profound meaning. Fear had been faced, danger had been exposed, and survival had prevailed. The courtroom held its collective breath, caught between awe, relief, and lingering tension. Richard Hart, escorted from the room, cast a glance back at his daughter. There was no malice left in that look, only the faintest trace of realization. He had underestimated the strength, courage, and intelligence of the smallest person in the room. The officers guided him away, and with each step the room seemed to exhale collectively. The immediate danger had passed, yet its echoes lingered, a reminder of the invisible battles fought in silence. Judge Keller finally addressed the courtroom, his voice calm but imbued with authority. "Today, we have witnessed courage of a remarkable kind. Let this be a reminder: bravery and vigilance can emerge in the smallest forms. Let us honor it by understanding, protecting, and learning from it." The room remained hushed. The words carried weight, but the quiet heroism of a child had already spoken louder than any voice ever could. Lily clutched her rabbit tightly, still trembling but slowly relaxing. She had faced danger in silence, communicated the threat, and guided the courtroom through peril. Judge Keller's gaze softened. A quiet nod, a subtle smile, acknowledged her bravery. The courtroom had seen a spectacle of courage, though most would never fully grasp the intricacies of the silent language that had saved lives. Julia exhaled, relief mingling with lingering fear. "Thank you, my brave girl," she whispered again. Lily's fingers moved one last time on the rabbit, a final, subtle tap. The judge recognized it immediately, the child's silent affirmation, a message of resilience and understanding. Danger had been faced, courage had been demonstrated, and survival had prevailed. The courtroom remained suspended in awe, whispers spreading like wildfire, as the small, quiet hero, Lily, reminded everyone that courage could speak without words, and that even the smallest signals could shift the course of fate. The courtroom had settled into an uneasy quiet. Spectators still whispered in disbelief, their eyes lingering on the small girl clutching her rabbit, whose silent signals had shifted the balance of power in ways no one could have imagined. Lily's fingers tapped lightly on the worn stuffed animal, a quiet rhythm that spoke of lingering caution. Though the immediate threat had been neutralized, the room seemed to hold its collective breath, aware that something extraordinary had just occurred. Courage, intelligence, and intuition had overcome brute force and intimidation. Judge Keller's eyes softened as he surveyed the courtroom. He had guided the proceedings with steady authority, but the real hero, he knew, was the child. Lily's silent bravery had exposed a dangerous man, navigated an invisible threat, and ultimately ensured the safety of herself and her mother. His gaze met Julia, and he gave a subtle nod, a silent acknowledgement of the mother's own resilience and the quiet heroism of her daughter. Julia finally allowed herself to lean forward fully, reaching for Lily's small hand. "You were incredible," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how you stayed so brave." Lily's fingers moved once more, gently tapping on the rabbit. It was her subtle reply, almost imperceptible. "I did what I had to." It was a gesture of strength, humility, and understanding, and to those who could read it, it spoke louder than words ever could. Richard Hart, now seated outside the courtroom under the supervision of officers, had begun to understand the depth of the challenge he had underestimated. His attempts to intimidate had been dismantled by the courage of a 7-year-old girl who refused to be silenced. His eyes flicked briefly toward the courtroom as the gavel fell again, and he caught a glimpse of his daughter's steadfast gaze. For the first time, he seemed genuinely unsettled, realizing that control and fear were not always sufficient weapons. The The judge addressed the courtroom formally. Today, we witnessed an extraordinary demonstration of courage and presence of mind. Let it be a reminder that even in silence, bravery speaks volumes. Miss Lily Hart has shown remarkable strength, and it is our responsibility to honor it by protecting those who rely on it. His words rippled through the room, carrying both gravitas and quiet awe. Every adult present felt the weight of the moment, realizing that a child had shifted the course of events through a courage they themselves had rarely seen. Lily's small hands finally relaxed slightly, the tension of the past hours lingering in her muscles. The rabbit remained clutched to her chest, but the tightness was easing. Her eyes, wide and luminous, scanned the room. She noticed the murmurs of admiration, the subtle nods of recognition from the bailiffs, the gentle reassurance from the judge, and the tearful gratitude of her mother. In this moment, Lily understood that her silent bravery had been seen, and that the world, even in its incomprehension, had acknowledged her courage. Julia whispered again, softly but firmly, "We're safe now. You did it." Lily's fingers moved one last time, a delicate sequence that was almost ceremonial in its finality. One tap on the rabbit, two on the wrist, and a firm press of the thumb against the palm. Judge Keller's eyes flicked to her and back to Julia, recognizing the meaning instantly. A message of completion, of survival, of a chapter closed but never forgotten. Outside the courtroom, reporters began to gather, their pens and cameras poised for a story that had already begun to spread like wildfire. Julia took Lily's hand, holding it tightly as they moved through the courthouse hallway. She glanced down at her daughter, whose small stature belied the incredible fortitude she had displayed. The hallway seemed unusually bright, the sunlight catching dust motes like sparks of hope. Julia squeezed Lily's hand. "You showed everyone how brave you are. The world will remember this, sweetheart." The media frenzy would later describe the incident as a remarkable moment of bravery or a child's silent heroism. But for Lily and Julia, the memory of the ordeal was more personal than public recognition. It was the quiet triumph of survival, of intuition, and of courage against intimidation. The applause and headlines would follow, but the real victory was private, internal, and profound. A mother and daughter bound by resilience and the unspoken language of trust. Judge Keller returned to his chambers briefly, reflecting on the extraordinary events. The calm authority he maintained during the crisis had masked a storm of adrenaline and fear. He thought of Lily, small but unyielding, and realized that sometimes the greatest demonstrations of courage come in silence. The child had communicated danger with precision, had guided the courtroom through peril, and had survived with dignity and bravery. Keller's mind lingered on the subtle gestures, the taps, the presses, the deliberate signals, that had conveyed so much more than words could. Even as the courtroom returned to its usual rhythm, whispers of awe continued to ripple through the spectators. Lawyers exchanged glances, bailiffs shook their heads in disbelief, and ordinary citizens murmured among themselves. All had witnessed a spectacle of silent heroism, though few could fully interpret it. The truth was that the smallest gestures, the quietest signals, had dictated the outcome of the day. Courage, often underestimated in children, had proven decisive. In the following weeks, Lily's story became quietly legendary. The courthouse recognized her bravery with subtle honors, a special commendation, a framed note from Judge Keller, and quiet words of praise from those who understood the gravity of her silent heroism. Julia, deeply proud, continued to whisper reminders to her daughter. "You are brave. You are strong. Never forget that." Lily, in response, would tap her small fingers gently against her rabbit, a silent affirmation of resilience and self-worth. And yet, even with recognition, there remained a lingering shadow. The father, Richard Hart, had been removed from the courtroom and was facing legal consequences, but the memory of his intimidation persisted. Julia held her daughter close, aware that the world could be dangerous, and that vigilance, courage, and trust would remain their tools. The rabbit, once a simple toy, had become a symbol of survival, of communication, and of silent heroism. The final scene of that courtroom day remained etched in memory. the small girl, trembling but resolute, clutching her rabbit, communicating danger without words and guiding adults with intuition and courage. Judge Keller, the officers, and Julia had all witnessed the impossible, a child turning the tides of danger with subtle signals, proving that courage does not require size, voice, or authority. It only requires awareness, presence, and the strength to act, even in silence. As the courthouse emptied, Lily and Julia walked hand in hand into the sunlight. The golden rays illuminated a world that had just shifted subtly but irrevocably. A quiet hero had emerged, a silent signal had been heard, and lives had been saved. And in the gentle tapping of tiny fingers on a rabbit, a message lingered, a reminder that courage could speak without words, and that even the smallest heroes could leave the deepest marks. The courtroom would remember the day differently than the headlines described. The world would see bravery, justice, and courage, but only a few would ever fully grasp the silent signals of a 7-year-old girl whose quiet acts had stopped a threat, commanded authority, and changed the course of fate. In silence, Lily had spoken louder than anyone could imagine, and the world would never forget it.